Hi, my name's Sheehan, and today I'd like to talk about Bruckner's 7th Symphony. And I'd like to go through this marvellous work, exploring how the music's put together in each of the four movements, because I do believe that having some understanding of structure and form in classical music can greatly aid our appreciation and enjoyment of it. Now, Bruckner wrote this work between 1881 and 1883. It premiered in December of 1884 by the Leipzig Gewandhaus Orchestra, conducted by Arthur Nikisch. And this must have been a tremendous occasion for Bruckner, because it was one of the few times in his life where symphony was well received. And this triumph must have meant so much to him, to this composer who had suffered so much humiliation and vitriol as well from the press and the critics in Vienna. So this premiere must have lived long in the memory for Bruckner. And today people still love this symphony. It's just such a beautiful work. And the work is in four movements. And the first movement, as you'd expect, is in sonata form. But as is usual with Bruckner, instead of having two subject groups, there are three subject groups in the Exposition and Recapitulation. And we begin with the first subject, which has to be one of the most beautiful melodies ever penned. It really is gorgeous. Such an inspiration, the opening of this work. We have a shimmer of E major in the strings, and then the cellos begin this noble and heavenly theme with support from the horns and clarinets. Note those beautiful suspensions, as if we're looking at Renaissance or even Baroque church music. Like a chain of suspensions, almost like bells tolling. And the violins take up the theme. So on. Such moving and beautiful music. And then we come to a second subject group, another very memorable melody. We have this kind of ticking, like clock-like idea on the horns, da, 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 da. B minor here. The music gets slightly more pastoral in nature, and then it turns rather stormy, builds to a climax, and we have the third subject group, which is built on this ostinato. That's passed round the orchestra and developed, That again builds to a climax. We hear these rising chromatic scales in the brass and woodwind, which takes us to this Wagnerian forte fortissimo climax, and then the music dies down in a rather pastoral way again, and eventually we go into the development, which begins with like these kind of shepherd calls. Mixed in with these Arcadian calls are snatches of the third subject in the flute. We then hear this new melody, which actually isn't new, it's actually the second subject inverted in this impassioned way in the cellos. We hear more of the third subject, and then the music, in a very thrilling and dramatic way, goes into C minor. Quite a shift from E major. Now we're here. And I love this moment in the symphony. It's kind of based on the first subject idea. This time goes like this. Da, 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 da. Really builds up in the incredibly exciting way. Then we hear the first subject proper in C minor in the second violins. And over that, the first violins play this gorgeous counter melody. Da, 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 da. And so lovely, so wonderful. It's one of my favourite points in this symphony. The music then, sure enough, comes back to the first subject for the recapitulation. We hear it in the horns, first of all. Then we have the second subject, as we'd expect. We have the third subject, which almost sounds comical here. I don't think you often associate Bruckner with comedy, but I think the way the third subject comes back sounds almost like a bit of a kind of a joke almost. Or maybe it's just me who thinks that, I don't know. It soon gets more serious again though, and we go into the coda, and as usual with a Bruckner symphony, the coda is wonderful. Those piling up of those suspensions which we've heard in the first subject, and then the first subject, lo and behold, comes back in the winds and the horns in this thrilling coda. The second movement, the Adagio, is really a funeral march. And of course, when you talk about a funeral march in a symphony, you're instantly reminded of Beethoven's Eroica. But here another composer is brought to mind. Whilst Bruckner was writing this movement, indeed this symphony, Wagner was very ill. Wagner, of course, was Bruckner's idol, and Wagner passed away whilst Bruckner was writing this. So this became something of a tribute to Bruckner's master, his hero really. And Bruckner even includes Wagner tubas in this movement, a quartet of Wagner tubas. Those are the instruments Wagner devised for the ring. They're kind of like small, almost euphonium kind of instruments. And it's that quartet of Wagner tubas which intone the main idea in this movement. And this movement really consists of two contrasting sections. Each time they're brought back, they're varied and developed, with a coda at the end. And by the way, the form for each of the movements is put down below in a description if you wish to follow this music with a score, or if you just like to listen out for the changes. So we begin with that idea, that solemn idea on the Wagner tubas, and we're in C sharp minor, which of course is the relative minor of E major, the tonal centre of the symphony. And then the strings come in with this idea full of grief. And then the music seems to wander slightly in terms of its key, and we get this new idea in this section. And then, sure enough, we come to the B section, the contrasting section of this funeral march, where we hear this new idea. This lovely melody is full of tenderness and perhaps a wistful melancholy. Perhaps Bruckner here is remembering Wagner in more personal terms. Then we go back to a reprise of the A section, the more solemn and more public face of grief. Etc. This time the music's far more developmental. And we have this amazing moment here. Over the music of that march, we have this wonderful swell of orchestral sonority with the violins going. Underneath that noble and solemn funeral march melody. We then have a return of the B section, this time again more developed, etc. We go back to A again with this beautiful violin figuration in the firsts. We reach an almighty climax, reaching 3 Fs, and then it dies completely down to pianissimo for the coda. And then we have a typically Brucknerian scherzo. The A section, of course, A, B, A, ternary form. The A section, which is in the small ternary form itself, as is also usual with Bruckner symphonies. We begin with this propulsive ostinato in the strings. Then we have this tune on the solo trumpet. We hear that tune then passed around the brass. Dum 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 da da dum da da dum da da dum 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 da dum dum da dum dum, and then we have this really exciting fortissimo climax. Da 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 the tune and these descending chromatic scales. And as I said, the A section itself is in ternary form. We have a B section in this in the A section, if you know what I mean, which develops that initial idea before we return to the trumpet tune again to round this section off. The trio, somewhat slower, as it says in the score, is a lot calmer, and it begins with the same kind of dum da dum dum da dum rhythm. So that gives a sense of unity in this section in the timpani, although somewhat slower. And we have etc. We have hints of the A section in the trumpets here. You know, as always with Bruckner, a certain bucolic charm to this this trio before we have a repeat of the Scherzo. The finale is again in sonata form, a kind of modified sonata form actually. Again with three subjects, and we begin with this perky idea. And, you know, cast your mind back to the very opening of the symphony. There's certain similarities with the... It's got a similar contour, this melody. And I don't think that's accidental. And you'll see why right at the very end of the symphony. Then we have this lovely hymn-like tune, which is perhaps reminiscent of the second subject of the first movement. So, again... Perhaps this is like this movement is somewhat maybe a mirror image of the first movement in some respects. That turn idea, da, 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 da. We've heard that before in the first movement, the second subject. And as is often the case with third subjects with Bruckner, the whole orchestra seems to play the same tune, almost in a monophonic texture. That strident, angular idea eventually brings us to a Codetta based on the first subject, etc. The development is based largely on the first subject. It's quite short, and listen out for those Wagner tubas which come back here. Then we have the Recapitulation, and this is a bit different because the ideas, those three subjects, are repeated back to front. So we start with the third idea. Then we have the hymn-like second idea. That beautiful string texture. And then we go back, sure enough, to the first subject again. We have a glorious and rousing coda, where we have, lo and behold, in the woodwinds and brass, the first subject from the first movement, thus bringing a sense of unity to the whole work. And my goodness me, isn't Bruckner 7 a fabulous symphony? If you don't know it, listen to it. If you do, listen to it again. Maybe follow the structure. I've put the form down below. And thank you to James Brockhurst, who suggested that I look at some more Bruckner, so thank you for that suggestion, James. And if anyone else has any pieces you'd like me to analyse and to explore, please put them in the comments below. Click like and subscribe, and thank you for watching. Bye.